Theodore Parker. The end of Christianity seems to be to make all people one with God as Christ was one with God, to bring them to such a state of obedience and goodness that we shall think divine thoughts and feel divine sentiments, and so to keep the law of God by living a life of truth and love. It means our purity in prayer, getting strength from God, and using it for our sisters and brothers as well as ourselves. It allows perfect freedom. It does not demand all people to think alike, but to think uprightly and to get as near as possible at truth. Not all people to live alike, but to live holy and to get as near as possible to a life perfectly divine. And good morning and welcome to All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church this Sunday morning for our online service. My name is Brian, and I will be your leader today. We do have a few announcements. Please remember that the church is still taking pledges. If you have not made your pledge or just forgot, you can send those in. Remember that though we are far apart, if you have pastoral care needs, you can still contact Reverend Will Humphrey at 740-263-1171 or email to will.allsouls@gmail.com. We have one birthday this week. Happy birthday goes out to Melanie Seaman on January 14th. Happy birthday, Melanie. So let us prepare for this day and open our hearts and mind as we begin with the prelude. At this time, I invite you to light a candle in your place of worship as we open the service with these words. Mythology is not a lie, Mythology is poetry. It is metaphorical. It has been well said that mythology is the penultimate truth. Penultimate because the ultimate cannot be put into words. It is beyond words, beyond images, beyond that bounding rim of the Buddhist wheel of becoming. Mythology pitches the mind beyond that rim to what can be known but not told. That's from Joseph Campbell and The Power of Myth. So this morning, I took the time to write my joys and concerns. I've had some thoughts, and I thought with the past week of events, and I'm going to start our joys and concerns this morning with something I wrote. And as I said, it would be hard to stand here today and not have joys and concerns to share this morning based on the events of the past week. 4 years ago, I stood here and I voiced my concern, pushing a bit too hard on the dangers of electing a narcissistic sociopath for president. Today, I stand here and have nothing to say about it because we have all witnessed for ourselves of that reality unfolding. Fortunately, we do have a good governing system set in place to solve these issues. Fortunately, because we have a free democracy, we will have new leadership in our capital in just 10 more days, and hopefully a problem impeached by the end of the week. For that, I have relief and joy. My concern is that the cult of ignorance that was given a voice will remain in our communities. That is why we are here this morning, to stand on the side of love, to stand on the side of justice, compassion, and equity, to not live in fear, but in hope and service in our living tradition. So please take a moment for your joys and concerns. Please type in a message in the text box for all those to see and respond to. We light this candle for all those joys we share today. We will light this candle for all those joys and concerns we hold in our hearts. Walter would like to light a candle.
I'd like to light one for American.
We'd now like to have Will Humphrey and our pastoral prayer.
Good morning. The times, the election, everything that's going on. We start our prayer today with the words of UUA President, the Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray. No matter the outcome of the election 2020, the truth I know is that hope is found in the struggle. Actions rooted in one's values, rooted in what we love, what we know to be true, kindles the fire of hope and inspiration in our hearts and in our communities. Hope is not found in being bystanders. Hope grows when we show up for justice, for love, for human dignity. And as I am coping with this election and where we find ourselves this fall, the COVID, with racism, the election, I'm finding life in The words of Langston Hughes is poetry that often harkens back to a time that a time we remember but never was, a time that harkens back to the moments when we think America was this great ideal, justice, truth. Yet we have our history that America wasn't America for everyone. And that hope that we remember when we look to the olden days, that hope becomes beloved community when we project it in front of us to our future. That we can be the land of prosperity, and we can be the land where everyone's voice matters, and we can be the land where everyone has access to opportunity. And our prayer today is that prayer of hope. Spirit of life, in this time of uncertainty, let us rest and get ready to lean into the promise of the United States that our values and our care can be for everyone. For the sake of our loved ones who are gone, for those who are here, and for those yet to be born, we can't stop. We won't stop, because this is who we are. Let freedom reign for everyone. Amen. May it be so. Let freedom reign.
And peace be with you. Our affirmation this morning comes from Joseph Campbell in The Power of Myth. Shakespeare said that art is a mirror held up to nature, and that's what it is. The nature is your nature, and all of these wonderful poetic images of mythology are referring to something in you. When your mind is trapped by the image out there, so that you have never make the reference to yourself, you have misread the image. The inner world is a world of your requirements and your energies and your structure and your possibilities that meet the outer world. And the outer world is the field of your incarnation. That's where you are. You've got to keep both going. As the novelist said, the seat of our soul is there where the inner and the outer worlds meet. We'll now take a moment for our offertory. Remember that if you would like to pledge or donate to All Souls electronically, you may download the Tithely app available for both Android and iPhone. Use the link scrolling below to find out more. The offering is accepted and grateful appreciate so that we may continue the good work of our church in our community and in the world at large. Our offertory hymn this morning is performed by Shelley Mock. It's called Sound Over All Waters. So let us prepare this now for meditation. And so this morning, I picked a meditation. It's called The Frost Myth. And of course, this morning, if you had an opportunity to go outside and see how beautiful the frost was sparkling everywhere as the sun came out and hit it. Fortunately, most of us live in modern homes that we don't wake up to, as our ancestors did, on frosty mornings and have the windows all frosted up. But prepare yourself for meditation as I read this by Alice Williams Brotherson. This poem is from, she lived between 1848 and 1930. This is The Frost Myth. Out of the frost and fire sprang Ymir, type of chaos. Long ago, mighty Odin slew the giant, as the Norsemen know. From the rushing blood, the ocean, in the swift thunderous torrents whirled. From the ponderous carcass, Odin carved the Midgard world. Of his hair made waving forests, of his skull the vaulted sky, molded from the bones the mountains which around us lie. Lo, today upon my window, Odin carves on every pane, to rebuke my skeptic smiling, a new world again. Mountain, forest, plain, and river flash upon my raptured sight. Here is summer's perfect joyance and spring's dear delight. Ferny cliff, cascade, and grotto glitter on the frosty pane. Miracle the Norsemen chanted, here is wrought again. Who shall say the gods have left us, or that Odin's power is lost? When new Midgards rise before us, out of fire and frost. When myths are true, when we hear or read the word myth, our first impulse is to associate it with the words false, fake, or untrue. Fake news. Someone tells us something that is not factual or untrue and or lacking in common sense, and we may then label what we read or hear as a myth. The actual definition of a myth is a widely held but false belief or idea. So what do we mean when we speak of something as being mythological? Well, we're going to learn about that this morning from everybody's favorite clinical psychiatrist. I'd like to welcome Dr. Walter Kania.
Well, good morning, everyone. Taking a moment to find my glasses. I might make note of the fact that for the past almost 20 years, I have been here at the Unitarian Universalist Church speaking, but actually my time here dates back to 1966, where I first appeared as your speaker. And in this extended period of time, I have observed people coming and lighting a candle. And I think that's an excellent practice to honor and to remember and to send prayers. This is the first time that I have done that myself. And what I did was I lit a candle for American democracy. Because American democracy is under threat. It's under the threat of one of the definitions of myths and mythologies perpetrated by a psychopath that was elected by an American democracy 4 years ago. And I feel honored to speak this morning in a Unitarian Universalist church because of the principles that are endorsed and embraced by the Unitarian Universalist movement. The first person being that of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And when you have an attempt with a racist coup to overthrow American democracy, you violate that very first principle of Unitarian Universalism. The second being that of justice, social and economic justice, equity and compassion in human relations. And that has been violated for 4 years. A third principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. A fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, not alternate facts. There's no such thing as alternate facts or fake news in the search for truth. The fifth principle, the right of conscience in the use of the democratic process within our congregations and our society at large, which was grossly violated this past Wednesday. And the sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And finally, the seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Now, I have to tell you that I usually prepare my messages about 2 months in advance. And I have that on my mind for a long period of time. But I could not ignore what has happened in our country, and especially what happened this past week. Some of you know my history and my background, and I do not support the use of pulpits for political purposes. But for me, this is not a political situation. It is a choice between democracy and fascism. And people have to notice exactly what those choices are. Part of my history has to do with the fact that the large airplane that you see flying around this part of Ohio and throughout the world is called the C-130. And I had the opportunity and the privilege and the responsibility as a U.S. Air Force officer and a pilot to fly the first version of that C-130 Hercules aircraft made by Lockheed. A part of that was because I had committed 8 years of my life and every day of my life in sacrifice to the country of which I was a part. And I swore my life to the Constitution of the United States of America. So for me, it's not political. It's strictly whether or not one is a part of a democracy or not. If you had the opportunity to look at our topic for today about myths and mythologies, you can find references in the first 3 books that I've written having to do with mythology and its role in religion. But it's obviously much wider than that. And the chances are really good that you probably have not given much time or attention to the ideas or the subject of myths and mythology. Because by definition, there are 2 definitions of the word myth. And one of them has to do with things that are false, or fictions, or fables. And another one has to do with a way of identifying ways of speaking of those things which are transcendent of who we are. Because words are not adequate to express what we're trying to talk about in our personal experience. that may have to do with something that is beyond and above what we consider natural. We may consider supernatural. Very few people realize that everyone engages in the use and the practice of myths and mythologies in trying to address what we call the mystical in life, because there's no other way to begin to do that. And in order to make our way in the world, we create religions and belief systems and worldviews and supernatural beings and systems to address our basic questions about life. Because there are no adequate words to answer our questions, we create stories. We create myths and mythologies to try to make sense of life. We might even look for a wizard of some sort to try to help us to understand, or maybe to lead us in ways that we find helpful. So religions or even mythologies, Joseph Campbell calls them the masks of God. They can be positive masks, or they can also be very negative masks. Political systems can be mythologies. And there are political persons and governments who present themselves with bluster and power, much like that great Wizard of Oz. But behind all of the noise, the smoke, the fire, you find nothing but a pitiful fraud, much as Dorothy found in the story of the Wizard of Oz. Someone or something to which you gave away your power without realizing it. So when we read the word myth, our first impulse is to associate it with something that's fictional or false or a fable or something that it's untrue. But there is this other definition, and it's the one that I think makes most sense of that word myth. We describe it as a traditional story, especially one that concerns the early history of a people, or explaining some natural or social phenomena, and involving supernatural beings or events. Mythologies are understandable stories to human minds that speak of the metaphysical, that speak of what is transcendent, or something in the spiritual realm, or something within the nature of our spiritual experiencer. They're stories that never happened, but they illustrate truths about human life or about transcendent realms. And a mythology can be described as a disguised manner of presenting truth, or a disguised manner of expressing truths. It's something that's easily remembered. And of course, they emerge in societies that are pre-literate, where people don't have words to express what they want to express, but they have experiences that they can identify with. And so a mythology may contain a hidden teaching or a hidden message through this method of storytelling. Well, I have 100 different ways to help you understand a myth, but I'm not going to go through all of them. But let me mention a few of them. That mythologies arose out of primitive societies, out of mankind's primitive understanding to make sense out of what were the puzzling paradoxes of life. And there are so many. In our age, science has helped us to address some of those puzzling paradoxes. But for early mankind, they were a part of his everyday life. Life itself is a paradox. Death and what it is a paradox. altering seasons. Why do seasons change? Primitive man asked, what is sleep? Am I still alive while I'm asleep, or have I died? Why is there day and why is there night? Why is there a sun that gives my body warmth, that gives me light, that makes everything live? Why is there thunder and rain and water? And why does my body need it for me to survive? Why is there sickness? Why is there health? What's the reason for a rainbow? How does childbirth occur? And what is this strange urge within who I am that we call sexuality? What are these things we call feelings? How do I understand that? Well, incidentally, science has come to the rescue with some of them, because science can help us to understand them, but science can never give meaning to what they are. That's something that we have to do. So these myths and mythologies are efforts to explain and make sense of all of these puzzling paradoxes of life. It's an attempt at finding a meaningful message between the individual, the society in which we live, and the cosmos in which we find ourselves, that we continue to find is ever more expanding, ever larger, ever more beyond anything we ever conceived. And how do we make sense of that? Well, myth and mythology give us an opportunity to begin to address that. How do you explain the creation of something out of nothing? What makes it possible for something visible to occur? How can the visible ever come from the invisible? How do you make that happen? And incidentally, what is this invisible? So myth becomes an attempt in story form to answer these big questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where did I come from? What's going to happen to me? So these myths are stories that help us to begin to understand, a way of synthesizing our bodies and our spirit, to answer questions about how to live in an alien world and how to survive, how to address the mysteries of life, how to awaken to our higher nature, how to connect us to that which we call the transcendent. It speaks of what's ineffable and beyond description. If you're a student of the Bible, you've run into a lot of mythologies. Story of Cain and Abel, for example. I'm sure that probably never happened, and yet it happens every day in families. It's a myth about sibling rivalry. The Garden of Eden. Did it exist at one time? Was there actually a garden somewhere? I doubt it. But it's a story of the ego and of the separation from the source from which we came. How about the story of a resurrection of a person who was crucified? Did that actually happen? Probably. But what is it about? It's a story about the fact that life never began or always began, but always continues. It never ends. It has always been eternal. It simply changes form. So myths clarify and point to truth. I find it kind of fascinating because if you're a student of myths and mythologies, you have to go to the library or read 3 different chapters in my first 3 books, which helps to understand them, because you have to study Joseph Campbell, the famous mythologist. He says that mythology gives us the message that the visible world in which we live is secondary. Secondary, not primary. It's dependent on a more basic transpersonal reality. He said mythology then becomes a means of seeking to communicate that more primal, transpersonal, or transcendent reality, which is the source of all that is visible. He says myth does not point to fact. Myth points beyond facts. Myth expresses insight. He said one author describes myths as little lies that are used to tell big truths. But myths really aren't little lies. They are stories told to demonstrate a truth. They are like parables or like fairy tales. It's a story, but it's a story about something that matters, about something that's important. They tell a story of an event that never really happened, but the story does illustrate some very important truth. Well, I think it's really important to know that the myth is not the message. It's only the carrier of the message. Just as we talk about the fact that a map is not the territory that you're looking at. It's an image of the territory. That the menu, for example, is not the meal. It's only a picture of the meal. That the envelope is not the letter. You have to get inside the envelope to find what's there. And that all these myths deal with the transformation of consciousness, taking us to a higher place or to a deeper part of who we are. Well, there's so many things that we could say about myths and mythologies, and Joseph Campbell. He's written 20 books about it, and they're all worthwhile and helpful. But for Campbell says, the basic theme of all mythology is that there is an invisible plane that supports the visible plane. The body is a vehicle of consciousness. It is the bulb that carries the light. So, myths answer questions like this. Am I consciousness? Or am I the vehicle of consciousness? Am I life? Or am I the vehicle of life? Very important distinctions. Look at and understand the light on the ceiling. We can look at the light on the ceiling as the bulb, or we can see it as the light that comes from the bulb. The bulb is a material object. You can touch it, feel it, see it. But the light that comes through the bulb, it can be seen, but it cannot be seen without the bulb. But the light energy exists whether the bulb is there or not. We are the light, and in this body, we are also the bulb. The light energy is an invisible entity. The bulb can be destroyed, but the energy that lights the bulb lives on forever. If we identify with the light, the consciousness of the individual knows that it exists without the bulb, and that it is one with all of being. We may think of ourselves as the bulb, but without the light, we are lifeless in our material form. Our body is the vehicle, like the bulb, and the light is what is universal and exists even without the bulb. Our bodies and our egos give us a personality that can be distinguished from the life force or the light that manifests in our bodies as personalities. In closing, based on our experience in our lives today in the United States of America, what I think we need to see that we live in a world of what I would call a current cultural myth that has been promoted for the last 4 years. It was rigged. The election was stolen. The virus is a hoax. That's a mythology. And people believed it as if it were factual or if all of this were true. So a mythology is a means of expressing and presenting truth, or it can be a way of perpetuating fictions and falsehoods. We spoke of the Wizard of Oz, for example, as a story, a book, a story that never happened, that's full of teachings and full of truths, a profound psychological and spiritual lessons that you find in the book as you read it. There's a yellow brick road, Dorothy's path to her own psychological and spiritual awareness, coming into her own to find out who she is. And Dorothy has 3 friends who learn that they already possess within themselves which it is that they are seeking on the outside. It's an awakening that they have all of this inside of who they are. But they never knew that. They become awakened to follow their inner guide, their highest self, and their need to make decisions, not just to sit on the side of the road, inactive. So in closing, let me simply help us remember that myths can be an attempt to reveal the truth, but they can also reveal falsehoods and fictions. That mythologies are understandable stories to human minds that speak of metaphysical, transcendent, or spiritual realms and experiences. They are stories that never happened, but they illustrate truth about human life and about transcendent realms. They can be described as a disguised manner of presenting and expressing those truths. And for sure to remember one lesson that's very important from the Wizard of Oz. Never blindly follow leaders or expect them to solve your problems. Good advice for those who have been misled and betrayed by our president. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Dr. Walter Kania, for that talk. I started coming to the church in about somewhere between 2004 and 2005, and I was highly influenced by listening to Dr. Walter Kania. That made me choose to become a member of this church and to become a Unitarian Universalist. But now I can look back on over 15 years of talks, guidance, wisdom, reading your books, and those all have been a guiding light on my spiritual path, and for that I thank you as well. But put it in perspective, Dr. Walter Kania says he's been speaking here since 1966. I was 3. But we close the service and extinguish the chalice with these words. Help us to be the always hopeful gardeners of the Spirit, who knows that without darkness nothing comes to birth, as without light nothing flowers. Please stay with us as we listen to the trio one more time. Postlude, they are going to play Ha Ha, the World Doth Pass. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in this morning and being with us here at All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. Thank you.